All right, joining me now, Liz Wheeler. She's the host of the Liz Wheeler Show, author of Hide Your Children, Exposing the Marxists Behind the Attack on America's Kids. And she's going to take the pro-Trump position. Liz, welcome.
Hi, Cenk. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, I'm struck by the title of your book. So let's start there, if you don't mind. You said that exposing the Marxists behind the attack on America's kids. So do you think Kamala Harris is a Marxist?
I think her policies are in line with Marxist ideology. If you look at an open borders policy, if you look at her support of Black Lives Matter, if you look at her soft on crime policies, if you look at her embrace of redistribution of wealth, a lot of that is in line with a Marxist ideology that takes private property or individual rights away from people and ostensibly gives them to the collective, but really gives them to government.
So Liz, you know Marxism is when the government takes all the private property, right? So your car, your home, your company, etc. You don't think Kamala Harris is going to do that, do you?
Well, when I analyze a politician's ideology, oftentimes, of course, they don't tell the American voter exactly where that ideology lies. But if you look at the people that Kamala Harris has hung around her entire life, or the people that she's praised. Let's use the Black Lives Matter organization, for example. In 2020, we all watched the Summer of Rage after George Floyd when Black Lives Matter rioters were torching buildings, assaulting cops. Kamala Harris posted on her X account, the tweet is actually still live for anybody interested in looking at it, encouraging the American people to go and donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which is a fund to bail out violent criminals who are arrested for the assault of cops or for the arson and the vandalism, the looting, the robbery that they were committing. And that's, I mean, you can't argue that that is a position, a political position that is encouraging of law and order. That would be a political position of chaos, of anarchy. And the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, the founders, I mean, Patrisse Cullors, for example, Alicia Garza, they actually admit they are trained Marxists. So that is not something that I am inferring from the Black Lives Matter movement. It's something that they have said that motivates their organization, and Kamala Harris supports that. Now, I know there are a lot of people in the United States, especially during 2020, who weren't Marxists. They thought they were supporting a good cause, but unlike many conservatives, I actually don't think Kamala Harris is stupid. I don't think that she's a dumb person. I think that she is an ideologue, and I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she supported not only the Summer of Rage, not only the violent rioters that were torching cities, but this organization themselves.
So, rioting and bailing out rioters, terrible. I agree with you, especially the ones that are guilty and trespassing and violence, etc. So that's why you were livid about Donald Trump saying that he's going to pardon all the January 6th rioters, right?
Well, listen, I mean, if you go back to what I said after January 6th, I do not support anyone breaking the law. I don't support the people that, broke windows and did things that they weren't supposed to do. But the penalty was not equal to the crime, of course. And you know this, the Supreme Court has ruled on it. You know that the terrorism enhancements for people who walked into the Capitol or at least into the region isn't exactly equal to walking through what they thought was an open gate or even going into the Capitol.
Seems like you're excusing it, Liz. It seems like you might be a little bit of a Marxist on that one.
No, I mean, I think the problem with January 6th was a couple of things. The problem with January 6th is the majority of Americans, this actually includes independents, by the way, and a hefty minority of Democrats, think that the government had agents that were, let's just say, inflaming the tensions around January 6th. And I think that freaks out a lot of people on the left and the right. I think you'd agree, Cenk, that that's the American government has a long history of doing that. It's people on both the left and the right, and we shouldn't support that no matter what political party that we're in. But when half of the country has questions about the integrity of an election, you can sit there and you can mock them, or you can say, well, was it completely free and fair? Do people have valid points? Aside, of course, from the few people who acted too far that day.
Yeah, so look, I'm going to argue that I'm enormously consistent here. I'll leave it to the viewers to see if they agree. But here's how what I said about Black Lives Matter protesters and the January 6th protesters. And I'm not sure that there's anybody else in the country who said it about both of them.
Do you think they were treated equally?
Yeah, hold on. Let me explain. So the people that the overwhelming majority of the protesters in 2020 that came out to protest what happened to George Floyd were peaceful, overwhelming majority. Some people broke the law, started the fires. They should definitely be prosecuted, okay? On January 6th, actually the majority of the people who came to hear Donald Trump speak didn't go to the Capitol. and didn't do anything wrong. They just came to a political speech. And so when they get lumped in with the rioters, I said that's not fair. They didn't go down and riot. So I'm consistent on both of those. And I even said about the January 6th guys, they should be prosecuted. But I'm consistent in that riots sometimes are the voice of the unheard. And the MAGA guys feel unheard because they hate the establishment so much, and the establishment never gives them a voice, and that's why they like Trump. So I get it, I get it. Nevertheless, they broke the law. The guys in 2020 that started the fires, broke the windows, broke the law, and they should be treated consistently. But you're saying supporting Black Lives Matter protesters who were peaceful and bailing out the guys who didn't do anything wrong, etc., is Marxism. But when it comes to January 6th, all of a sudden, well, we should be a little bit more lenient to rioters. That's what it seems like to me, but go ahead.
No, that's not what I said. Let me clarify what I said. I said the organizers, the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, Patrisse Cullors and Alicia Garza, admit that they are trained Marxists. They want to abolish the nuclear family. Their own words. You can look at the video.
Is there a place where you go get trained on it? I don't know. Who does the training?
Well, you can ask them.
Okay,
you can ask them. Yeah. They're the ones that said it. We can post it on X. People might be interested in seeing it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people actually. Liz, I'm not doubting that they said it at some point. I just am amused at the absurdity of it. There's no Marxist. There's no actual Marxist in American politics. Nobody's coming to get your house and your car. This is all like trying to scare people. Nobody's.
Cenk, you've been around politics long enough to take politicians at their word when they actually tell you what their
In fact, I want to get to that next. But go ahead, finish your thought.
But let me explain what I was saying.
Yeah.
The founders of Black Lives Matter say that they are Marxist. I see no reason not to believe them because that's what their actions show. When you sound a little bit like CNN, remember that CNN video that went around during the Minneapolis riots when the CNN guy was standing there, he's like mostly peaceful riots, and in the background there was all that fire and all that arson. It's like a meme on X now.
But you guys say the same thing about January 6th.
There's billions of dollars of damage, so it wasn't just 1 or 2 or 3 people that were looting all those stores and assaulting cops and burning people up. I mean, you people on the ground, the American voter, I believe they're smarter than to fall for the idea that it was just a couple of people that were engaging in violence around that time. So all of that to be said, the violent people that were doing the work of the Black Lives Matter organization, yeah, that's engaging in Marxism. And specifically to Kamala Harris bailing people out, let's talk about who the Minnesota Freedom Fund bailed out. There was a guy that was imprisoned, and because he was bailed out by this fund, he went and assaulted a woman. There was another guy that was bailed out that went on to kill someone. So this is not a harmless shoplifting, getting bailed out so he can get home in time to go to dinner in his mother's basement. These are violent criminals who went on to hurt other people. I would think you'd have a problem with that. I certainly do, and I know a lot of our viewers will too.
But I just told you that I had a problem with the people who committed the crimes. But you told me the January 6th guys were mostly tourists. To be fair to you, you didn't say that. I think Tucker Carlson did. So like I'm just pointing out the obvious double standard. But let me go to the next thing that you mentioned.
No, I mean, I said it didn't fit the crime. This is my question. Jacob Chansley, who is the guy that people call QAnon shaman. Do you think if he had not been apprehended that he would have gone on to overthrow the seat of American government? Like, what do you think would have happened to that? What do you think he would have done if he wasn't stopped?
And actually, Liz, I mean, I want to get back to the idea of Kamala Harris being an ideologue and believing politicians or not. But but just real quick, last thing on this. No, what I've always said about the rioters is that they were the pawns used by Peter Navarro, Eastman, that's Trump's lawyer, Trump himself, etc., that came up with a plot to delay the certification. They wanted Mike Pence to do it. When he didn't, they got people so angry they wanted to murder Mike Pence. And so the whole point of that was not to take the building and keep it. People who imply that are being super silly. That would never, ever work. No, it was to delay the proceedings so they could bring in their fake electors. And they did have fake electors. I interviewed Rudy Giuliani at the RNC, and he said the real Trump electors wouldn't do it. And so they had to bring in fake electors to do it. And Liz, that's why I'm against Donald Trump. I don't like the establishment at all. But a guy who says that he wants to terminate the Constitution, set up a fake elector scheme to overturn an election, that guy hates America. I'm not going to vote for a guy who doesn't believe in our democracy and our Constitution. So I don't understand how you guys can get past that.
Well, a couple of things. I don't think that that's an accurate characterization of what happened. I mean, if you go back in American history, in 1960, Hawaii actually rescinded the certification of their electoral votes, meaning they took back their electors because they had fraud, and they wanted to make sure that that fraud was taken care of so that people could count on the integrity of their votes. So it's not unheard of for a state. It is wonky, it is nitty-gritty, it is uncommon, but it's not unheard of historically, nor is it illegal for states to reevaluate what slate of electors are sent to the vice president to count. That's actually what was asked of Vice President Mike Pence. And you can agree with what Mike Pence did, you can disagree with what Trump did, that's fine. But the accurate characterization of what happened is there were state legislatures from Pennsylvania, from Georgia, from Wisconsin, from Arizona, who actually wrote to Congress and said, well, wait a second, now that we have more information about some of the things, the electioneering is what I call it, the changing of the rules that happened before the election. Now that we have more information, we want to make sure that our election was secure. We want to make sure that the integrity of people's votes are protected. So just hold on a second before you certify to make sure that this slate of electors is actually the slate of electors that we want to send. That's what was asked of Mike Pence. He wasn't asked to judge which slate of electors was real or not real. He wasn't asked to make that decision unilaterally.
No,
he was just asked to hold on a second.
So Liz, they were fake electors, and second of all, he didn't win the election. So
what do you mean when you say fake electors, though?
So you have your slate of electors. Like today, Kamala Harris has her slate of electors, and Trump has his. Those are already in place, and they had them in 2020 as well. But Donald Trump's real electors wouldn't sign off on him winning the election because he didn't. So they had to bring in fake electors that weren't even Trump's, because they were the only ones willing to sign documents saying he won when he didn't win. I mean, Liz, you know he didn't win, right?
That's not what was asked of Mike Pence. That's not what was asked of Mike Pence. This is a really, really important
what was
point for
asked
people
of
to
Mike
understand.
Pence, no, let me clarify. What was asked of Mike Pence is don't certify so that it goes back to the states, and then we'll have the local Republicans pretend you won and install your fake electors. So
no, listen, you're familiar, I'm sure, with the 12th Amendment of the Constitution. You're, I'm sure, familiar with how the Electoral College works. You know that, say if there's a governor of a red state, take Kansas, for example. If the governor of Kansas, which Trump won, and this is hypothetical, if he decided to send a slate of Kamala electors to the United States Congress, that would be fraudulent. That would not be how the people voted. So is there any recourse for that? Well, sure, there's recourse. He can call a joint session of his state legislature. They can send an alternate slate of electors. There are things that happen if there's any kind of fraud, and that's what hasn't been litigated in our country. That's what the question was on January 6th that Mike Pence decided that Trump disagreed with him on.
You send the real electors.
Listen to what I'm saying.
You don't invent new electors.
I know it's wonky and I know it's complicated, but your viewers probably want to know exactly what happened, because the reason that you and I both work for alternative media organizations is because we don't want to just constantly be hit with the spin of the corporate media. We want to actually engage with what the truth is. Sometimes the truth is complicated. So in my hypothetical example, there is recourse for what to do if a state sends electors, but there are people in the legislature who have a role, a constitutional role, of course, as you know, to send those electors. And if the governor of that state does not call a joint session of the legislature, well, then members of that legislature asked Pence, hold on a second while we figure this out. That's what happened.
But they already figured it out, Liz. So last two things on this. So look, number one, in a situation where one guy's trying to cheat, like the governor of Kansas, et cetera, in your hypothetical, you would then install the person's actual electors. You don't have to come up with new electors. They both have slates of electors. So that's why the fake electors gives the game away, that they were definitely wrong. Second of all, you would do that in a scenario where you actually won the vote. But Georgia did 3 recounts, a hand recount. Arizona did 2 recounts. They all did recounts. It wasn't even close. Liz, at this late date, are you still pretending that Donald Trump won the 2020 election?
Well, listen, I think it's really important to define the word win, because this is one of those gotcha questions that you might see on CNN or MSNBC. But what many conservatives were concerned about in the wake of the 2020 election, and a lot of conservatives feel the same way today, it's not whether the number of ballots was greater for Donald Trump or for Joe Biden. It was whether the rules were changed before people cast their ballots that allowed certain votes to be counted that otherwise shouldn't have been counted. And I'll give you a specific example of this. In the state of Wisconsin, there were ballot drop boxes placed around the state. Well, those ballot drop boxes, according to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, this was litigated afterward, are against the Wisconsin Constitution. So the people that cast those ballots, no, they specifically weren't committing fraud. They weren't voting in someone else's name, but they may have been counted invalidly. And so I think, obviously, again, it's wonky. It's not that those people were running around trying to steal people's votes, but the rules had been changed without the authority to change them. The people that changed them didn't have the authority to change them, didn't have the authority to put those drop boxes in place. And so, yes, the vote totals may have looked like they favored Joe Biden. I'm not necessarily contesting that, but were the rules rigged before the election in order to get that outcome? I would say, yes, we have evidence of that.
Yeah, it's nonsense. So the Republicans.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled on it. Anybody can go look at that ruling.
I got you. No, I understand the claim you're making. My point is, Brian Kemp, for example.
Where is the Wisconsin Supreme Court wrong on that?
Hold on, let me explain. So Brian Kemp, for example, when he was running against Stacey Abrams, especially the first time, wiped away a lot of Democrats from the voter rolls, pretending that, oh, I am just getting rid of dead people on the voter rolls. Didn't do it to Republican counties, did it only to Democratic areas. It was, in my opinion, massive cheating. So I hated that election. I hated the result of that election. I thought it was an election that was illegitimate in a lot of ways. But what's done is done. I hate that that's true, but the votes were cast. You don't get to say afterwards, well, I didn't like the way you did the election. What are we gonna do, just redo it? I'm gonna pretend I won? Should Stacey Abrams have gone and rioted and tried to take the Georgia state capitol? No, we have rules. By the way, the Republicans are doing it right now. They're wiping away voter rolls all over the country. I hate that they do that, and they should be prevented ahead of time from doing that. But if we can't prevent them ahead of time and people go to vote, it is what it is. So this constantly relitigating, no, I'm not leaving office. I'm not leaving office. Everything is cheating. If I don't win, it's all cheating.
If someone who doesn't have the authority to change a rule.
Then Liz, hold on, let me finish the thought. Then, okay, you say, okay, if Kamala Harris thinks that you guys did cheating just the way that you described and just the way that I just described, since she's the vice president, she could not certify the election, right? And she could say, that's it, I'm sending it back and I got a bunch of fake electors who are gonna come in and say I won. Hey, I thought you were cheating ahead of time.
I wanna hear your answer about Wisconsin. Was what they did in Wisconsin fair? Was that in accordance with election law?
Which part of Wisconsin? Because there's a lot of things.
When they put the ballot drop boxes all around Wisconsin, was that in accordance with the Wisconsin Constitution?
I haven't studied the Wisconsin Constitution. That's a hilarious thing to ask. But ballot drop boxes are perfectly legitimate. Republicans use them as well. In fact, right now, Donald Trump is encouraging people to vote by mail. So, I mean, you're
it's a very important question, and here's
desperately to hang on to something so you could please Donald Trump and say, oh yeah, you won, Donnie, you won. He didn't win.
I gave you a concrete example of a way that votes could be cast seemingly validly, but counted invalidly, and it's a concrete example. It's a very simple question. If ballot boxes are against the Wisconsin Constitution, people who didn't have the authority to put them there anyway, and those votes were then counted.
Okay, even if you find one loophole, hey, I think there was one thing that was slightly wrong in Wisconsin. How about Georgia? How about Arizona? He lost. The more you guys talk about how we don't like it. It looks terrible. Your polls go down. So I'm glad you're still sticking to that position. Now let's go back to the other thing.
Listen, you can't answer the question because you're on the wrong side of that. You can't answer the question because
no, Liz. I'm happy to adjudicate everything in the right process. What's the right process? We live in a democracy, 3 branches of government, and the right process is you go to the courts. So if you guys had gone,
the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled on it.
Let me finish. So if you guys go to the courts and you prove that it was unconstitutional and they have a remedy for that, God bless. And you did go to the courts and you lost all 61 cases because you guys were monumentally full of crap.
What did the Wisconsin Supreme Court say?
Okay, I can ask you about some random piece of court
this is my
too.
question.
I don't know what the Wisconsin Supreme Court said. Do you know what the court said when they asked Rudy Giuliani and one of the? Hold on, Liz. You know what? Let me answer. Then I'll go to you.
When you don't know about the adjudicated case.
Okay, so no, I know that you guys went to court 61 times and lost every single time. I know. I don't know if you know this. Okay, hold on. Let me do the same trick you're doing. When the court asked Rudy Giuliani, sir, can you please present your evidence on voter fraud? What did Rudy Giuliani say?
Cenk, I will answer that once you answer about what the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled on this. Did they say that it made the election results, that it protected the integrity of the vote, or did they say, this is actually super interesting. Your viewers are gonna love what the Wisconsin Supreme Court said. Okay. The Wisconsin Supreme Court said, putting ballot boxes around the state of Wisconsin, which violated the Constitution of the state, was illegal, but they said this should be something that voters take care of afterward, because you do have a point, and there is a history in our country that says that once an election has been certified, once it is a certain length of time past the election, it's not in the interest of the country to yank that person out of the White House and install someone else. I don't actually disagree with you on that, but that was the problem between Election Day and between January 6th, is that's a long enough amount of time to figure out what had happened, but Democrats weren't interested in figuring out what had happened because they were the ones that rigged the election to begin with. That's dishonest.
So Liz, look, I hate what Trump did in crying and crying and trying to overturn our democracy after he lost. But what you're doing is a giant favor, not to me because I don't like it, but to the Democratic Party. Because what you're saying is, hey guys, don't worry if you lose. Just go to court, try to find some loophole, try to invalidate all the results. Who cares about who actually won, who got more votes? Just litigate, litigate, litigate. Come up with fake electors. Never give up. Don't do a peaceful transition of power. If you need a delay, bum rush the Capitol. The American people don't want that. It's massively losing ground for you guys. Anyways, to finish the thought, Rudy Giuliani says, I have no evidence. Okay, so now, before we run out of time, we're about to. So go back to the ideologue issue. You say Kamala Harris is an ideologue. I don't think she's an ideologue at all. And I'm not a big defender of Kamala Harris. I'm definitely not a defender of the establishment Democrats. And I think that mainly what they do and what the establishment Republicans do, but unfortunately also what Donald Trump does, is they do whatever the donors ask them. So if corporate donors control these politicians, so if a corporation that's a drug company or a defense company, et cetera, tells Kamala Harris what to do, she's much more likely to do it. I think it's also true of Donald Trump. So generally speaking, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that I mean, she was on stage with Liz Cheney, right? Of course she is beholden to the military-industrial complex. This is what I would say about the contrast of this election. None of this is hypothetical. Donald Trump has been president. Kamala Harris has been vice president. Before that, senator. Before that, the attorney general of the state of California. So we know what we're getting with both of them. And actions speak louder than words. This election is actually not about either of their personalities. It's not about their X accounts. It's not about their word salads. It's about you. It's about you and I, and it really comes down to the question, were you better off under Donald Trump or are you better off under Kamala Harris? And I would argue that Kamala Harris has brought us to the brink of World War III through the Ukraine war and her funding of the Ukraine war. She is the sitting vice president after all. This is entirely dangerous. I don't want to die in war with Ukraine. You don't want to die in war with Ukraine. We don't want our money devalued. All this spending on her wars, which she profits from, has caused inflation to skyrocket. Since she and Joe Biden took office, inflation has skyrocketed by 20%. I'm talking the price of gas up 46%, the price of food up 22%, the price of electricity up 30%. Meanwhile, she denies that there's a crisis at the southern border. We have millions and millions of people crossing every year across our border. It's completely unsecured, including criminals and terrorists. There are right now over 600,000 illegal aliens in our country who have a criminal history, which is dangerous to us. And meanwhile, our cities, she did not do anything to help the violent crime rate in our cities. In fact, during the Biden administration, crime has gone up by 4.5%.
Yeah.
If you contrast that to how we were under Donald Trump, it's not rocket science. Everyone in this country and everyone watching the show don't necessarily have the privilege to vote emotionally. A lot of people have to vote for the candidate who is better for them, who makes it easier for them to make a living and have a job, and makes it easier for them to build up a savings and take care of their family. That choice is pretty obviously Donald Trump.
So I wish I could counter all the inflation, immigration, all crime, all those issues. I'll do it with other conservatives that are about to come on because I don't want to take their time away. We're out of time here, but and Israel for sure too, because Donald Trump is saying we should start the war immediately. He's a very ironic anti-war candidate. Anyways, but I do want to end on one last thing, Liz, which is that I wanted to note the irony that in the beginning you said that Kamala Harris is a type of Marxist and could take away people's companies. And at the end, you said she works for companies and corporations and her donors. So does she want to take away private companies or does she want to help private companies?
Probably both. I mean, people in power are completely corrupt. You know that about Kamala Harris. I mean, she's nothing if not a power-hungry, power-grabbing, corrupt politician here. If you're talking about, I mean, I do have one last question for you. I look at your content sometimes. I certainly looked at your X account. How, and this is a sincere question, I'm just curious, how can you consider voting for Kamala Harris when she sits on stage with Liz Cheney, who is the neocon of all neocons? Like, she just wants to make money off of sending people to war and killing people. How can you vote for her if she's on stage with Liz Cheney?
Yeah, no problem. So let me answer this, then I got to go to Dan Holloway. I hate it. I hate that she's on the stage with Liz Cheney and that she's embraced Dick Cheney. I think it's a terrible political strategy. I don't want anything to do with the neocons. But every time I see Kamala Harris doing something wrong, I look over to Donald Trump and he does it worse. So how can you live with Donald?
There were no wars,
Hold on, let me explain.
no new wars during Donald Trump's presidency.
I know. You guys love that talking point, except for the fact that right now, Donald Trump, when asked about the Middle East and Israel, he said they should immediately bomb Iran, and he's going to pay for it. He's going to make us fight for that war, fight that war. So he is actively more pro-war than Kamala Harris. It's always damned if we do, damned if we don't.
No. Actions speak way louder than words, unless you're voting emotionally. When Donald Trump was president, there were no new foreign wars. He ended foreign wars.
Sure.
Under the Biden-Harris administration, we are spending, what is it, $175 billion?
He's going to make us pay for all those wars, and you know
$175 billion to Ukraine.
Are you saying he's not going to make us pay for Israel's war? Are you saying that he's not going to make us pay for it?
I think that there's cognitive dissonance that you pivot to Israel instead of looking at what Kamala Harris is doing with Ukraine. I mean, does that not bother you?
It's the exact topic we were talking about. Okay, I got to go. Liz, thank you for doing it. I appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
Thanks, Cenk.
We should do it again sometime. Everybody check out Liz Wheeler. Thank you.
Thank you.